Thank you very much, everybody. Welcome again. We're here, Tropical Nomad, 6:25. Every Monday we go live, maybe 6:30. Tonight is episode 467. It's all about navigating compliance here in Indonesia. Now, as you may know, regulatory changes in Indonesia are being enforced more than ever, creating confusion, fear, and misinformation. Businesses, investors, and property owners are navigating new legal landscapes from property regulations, SLF PBG, to taxation, investment, LKPM, and compliance requirements. Woohoo! So the purpose of tonight is to cut through uncertainty. So tonight we obviously welcome a friend, a brother, Terje H Nilsen, who is a trusted expert with over 30 years of and business regulatory landscape as a founder and CEO of Seven Stones Indonesia, and tonight's show is proudly presented by Seven Stones Indonesia. Terje has helped countless investors and businesses understand, adapt, and thrive with these evolving regulations. So these are some of the takeaways from tonight, why you should tune in, get clarity on Indonesia's latest regulations from a leading expert, avoid costly mistakes by misunderstanding and what is exactly required. And you get to ask your I'm not sure about burning questions, but you get to ask your questions live. So every Monday we have a studio audience or an audience which you are very welcome to join. It's free. There's no RSVP, no membership required. And as I was saying before, we've had 1,000 guests. We've had 10,000 audience members. And of those 10,000 audience members are countless deals, are countless partnerships which have been formed, maybe some ones which have been broken up as well, but we won't talk about those. So the idea is you come and you network in person with people who are aligned to that topic. So tonight we have all sorts of people involved in real estate, business, investment, and so on. So quite often you may find a team member, a service provider, a partner, just by being in the audience. So this is really important why you should come. So a little bit more about our guest, Terje. As I mentioned, the founder and CEO of Seven Stones Indonesia, Bali's leading business consultancy. He's the owner and principal of Paradise Property Group. That was pretty smooth, wasn't it? It was. Bali Fab 40 award winner, recognized for leadership and innovation. He's a speaker and advisor with over 30 years advising on real estate, hospitality, and Indonesia's legal system. So, as many of you may know, my name is Robert Ian Bonnick, the founder of SpeakuP Monday, and 3 award-winning initiatives centered around growth strategy and being a gateway to Indonesia and Australia. And look, we take off after business setup kind of finishes. So after compliance, someone like Terje is finished. That's what we do, from connecting our clients to their respective markets, to their respective partners, to their respective clientele in around 10 different market sectors. So, and our work has been recognized, endorsed respectively domestically by the Ministry of Tourism and Creative Economy of Indonesia, Bali stakeholders. We've been awarded the #1 change maker in Bali, UNESCO World Heritage, who also won Best Tourism Village in the world, and a few more. We're internationally recognized by Forbes Business Council, Founder Institute, Startup Grind, and many more. I know it's a pretty long intro, but this is how we roll. So if you would like our support, feel free to reach out. So let's finally start tonight's episode. So compliance in Indonesia, as I mentioned, brought to you by Seven Stones Indonesia. Now, let's take a breath. So Terje, I've known you for some time. Look, if I asked you, outside of the intro which I just did for you, there's quite a few people here who maybe don't know who you are or the work that Seven Stones does. So if I would ask you, Terje, why should people listen to a word that you have to say, what would you say? Over to you.
How long do I got? No, I think
5 minutes.
I think, like Rob said, I've been here for a very long time, more than 30 years living here. I started coming here a lot as a kid because my parents also was here, and even on my grandmother's side, she was here before Indonesia was even a country. So Indonesia has always been a thing in our family, and I think that kind of leads to my sort of self-proclaimed superpower. If anything, my brain functions half Indonesian, half expat, and I guess that's what we're good at, to sort of make sense out of Indonesian regulations towards a common law Anglo-Saxon mindset, which I think most of you are. And our company, I've kind of gone through the sort of corporate deals in Jakarta, working for some of the bigger Indonesian companies, and that's where I sort of got my base of internship, I guess, knowing everyone, getting drunk with people who today are ministers and directors of different divisions. Moved to Bali in 2004. By that time, I had kids and dogs and cats and a wife.
One kid was Miss Indonesia as well. Let's not skip that
2017,
one. Okay.
yeah. Beauty, like me.
Got the looks from dad, we know this.
But we started off doing development, so we built and sold villas like a lot of people do in Bali today. Back then it was not that many, but it's grown over the years. And I guess that was the first sort of learning curve on the do's and don'ts. In those days there was a lot of nominee structures, and you could basically do not whatever you want, but pretty close. And we had some run with the bigger sort of Australian brands in terms of real estate brokerage, the Ray Whites, the Harcourt, so that learned us a bit more, I guess. And then through that, I was always very vocal and outspoken about regulations and try to be in compliance when nobody really cared about that. But I always said that the time is going to come when Indonesia is going to normalize and find its way, and that's happening. It's taking pride in itself. It's a big country. It's a big economy, and it moves forward, taking more space internationally in a good way. And that's when we sort of saw that process. We started Seven Stones. We were still kind of into a real estate mood, as we kind of see that's where we have an awful lot of experience. But we thought that we were going to have an in-house consultancy business for clients that wanted to buy real estate. So we hired a couple of lawyers and a notary, and off we went. And I think then people realized that it could come for advice. At the same time, we opened up an office in Jakarta where we work quite closely with the Nordic embassies, so Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland. That's a bit different. It does the same thing, but more corporate in the sense that it's, renewable energy, waste management, whatever else, and not so much hospitality and real estate. But here in Bali, it's all about hospitality and real estate. So in addition to the superpower I mentioned, I think there are many tax consultants who is better than us, many legal advisors that is better than us. But I think that sort of overall understanding and cross-border in between all of these aspects were pretty good. And today we have a team of about 50 employees, some lawyers, some tax consultants, some I don't really know what they're doing, but they're there. Bit into marketing and real estate, yeah.
Love it. One of the things which I may as well just get it out the way, get it done, is that now many of us here, when we first came to Bali, I'm laughing because I know what's coming next, and I know that you've all been through it. So you start off here, you want to do the right thing, right? You come with good actions, good deeds, good thoughts, good intention. And then you think, right, I want to set up a business here, or I want to buy a property, or whatever it might be. And then you go through, not that there's the yellow pages here, but you somehow track down, maybe you get like an ad, right? They look decent, this company, and you go and see them, you ask for their advice. And they give you this advice, and you're like, okay, well, where I'm from, wherever that might be, we always get 2 or 3 sets of opinions to see what cross-matches, what cross-pollinates. So then we have a better idea on how the ground lies, right? So we go, thank you very much. We go to the second one. Again, they look professional, legal, all the rest of that. We get a second different opinion. Now we're like, okay, first one says the sky is blue. Next one says the sky is red. I think the third one must match up with one of those two, right? You go to the third one, and they say the sky is pink. They're like, oh no. So now you're really confused because now you've got 3 different opinions. Indonesia at large also, when it comes to these sorts of matters. So Terje is one of those people, which is my kind of go-to. Even I think yesterday I asked him something about something. I said, Terje, I've read this. Give me some clarity. And he comes back with boom. One of the reasons for all this time, but has worked with each government during that time. But genuinely worked with each government during his time. So I'm not saying that he has inside information or anything like that. I wouldn't say that on camera. Maybe I just did. But what I would say is that he's very up to date. So he's one of my go-to guys, one of my go-to advisors, and a friend, of course, to get clarity on these matters. So today we're going to talk about immigration. We're going to talk about tax. We're going to talk about BKPM. The fact that these three, which were distinctly different departments, are now coming together and sharing information. Right? So just so you know. So maybe we start with immigration. And before I finally let you speak again, we did an episode, I think, maybe last year, and it was about the law in Indonesia and where the laws came from. So anyone here who's interested in that, just go on YouTube, search his name as SpeakuP Monday, it will come up with it. And we spent a good hour and a half kind of going through, because most advisors here, they react to what has been written, react to what has been passed down. But they don't necessarily understand the mentality, mindset behind what was written. When you understand the mentality and the mindset, then you have a better way of being able to navigate what's in front of you, as opposed to being in reaction to. So that's a really powerful episode. If you haven't watched it, you should watch. So, Terje, when it comes to immigration, let's give these guys some information. Maybe give us a bit of background history, and then what's coming in, or what has been strengthened recently, and where people are basically being caught out.
Yeah, I think that was our sort of idea last week, that recently there's been a lot of compliance issues and stories flying around social media on people being deported for all kinds of reasons, ranging between, breaches of their work permit or visa, to LKPM, to also tax aspects. And like you say, now the first time we see that these ministries actually communicate with each other on compliance and lack of compliance. And I guess just going back to a little bit where we come in on that, we spend an awful lot of time, or at least I do, in our office, reading about laws that are on their way, emerging, coming. And this year there's going to be another law that makes every business compulsory have to comply with an audit every year. So end of each year, not only your tax report and whatever else, LKPM and so on, you also have to do an audit to show that you're in good compliance. That structure is coming. So things like that. I guess for immigration, the immigration today is no longer a sort of division with a director general that it used to be. It's its own ministry. So it's an independent ministry that manages immigration issues, not just expats coming to Indonesia, but also Indonesians obviously being abroad, and there's about 8 or 9 million of them, so that's a big portion of their work. And they manage all the jails, the bad guys that ends up behind bars. So probably a good fit for that ministry. But if I see back on how it has evolved since Silmi, who is now the vice minister and was the director general, got instructed by the president, Jokowi, former president. He grabbed the mess, if I might say. Indonesia was very open and welcoming during COVID to let us all stay, all kinds of aspects that they introduced to allow people to stay. And I think through that there was also a lot of abuse towards that, and that is what I think we see now, that there is a pushback on that abuse in terms of abusing visas and so on. With the new government, Prabowo taking over in October, then there was a new minister, Agus is his name. I had the pleasure of having a short discussion with him 2 weeks ago, and then Silmi now being the vice governor. But I think the main change, if anything, October 2023, there was a new regulation that added on a lot of new visas and new opportunities. In many ways, digital nomads, but also what Indonesia call the diaspora, so normalization of Indonesians being abroad, how they can reclaim citizenship, and also, like for me, mixed kids, how they can find their way back into an Indonesian citizenship. And into the future, I think actually Indonesia will also eventually allow dual citizenship, but let's see. But I guess the big one there, the main change on that to people being in business, was the change of investor kitas. So if you're on an investor kitas prior to that, October, and then they had a confirmation towards the end of the year, and a final sunset policy towards the end of 2024, where if you now want to continue on investor kitas, the 1 billion or 1.25 billion in paid-up capital that you have to show on your deed of establishment now has to be 10 billion. So that, I think, is the major change, and how that then may impact your general business planning. Some people get nervous in the sense that they may have multiple shareholders and they're all on investor kitas, and how do they do that? They may not have substantial investment and suddenly need to then maybe increase the paid-up capital to 40 billion, 50 billion. But out of that, there is then other options like a working kita, so you can go back being a director of marketing, director of operational, director of many different things, where you don't have to hold 10 billion, you actually have to have less. So that, I think, was the major change, how immigration differentiated on that. And I think the aspect that we need to understand is that setting up a business and having a residential status or a working permit is two different things. Like any country, many countries will have a very easy setup of business, but it's not that easy to actually have a residential status. And that's what immigration is saying, that if you are an investor and you want to be here on an investor kitas, we want to see some substantial commitment, and that's where the 10 billion comes from.
And then, so what else do you see has been the recent challenges that people have been facing? So we've had quite a bit of what I call clickbait headlines, right? These are headlines that go overseas and that create fear. Right, they create fear, division, finger pointing. These guys can't get it together. Blah 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 blah. And a lot of this has been doing with deportations from immigration. So, what have you been finding? Maybe are the 1, 2, or 3 most, the most common reasons why this has been happening, and maybe to clarify outside of this clickbait, what is actually happening?
I think in general it's a cleanup after what we saw in COVID and the abuse, and in particular, I guess the main thing is that you shall not and cannot and will not be on an investor kitas if you don't have a business. Yeah. There's also, unfortunately, companies who sold an investor kitas and tell people that they can do different types of business, and they put 10, 20, sometimes 30 people into a company. That is now falling apart. They've also gotten very strict on, if you have a kitas, where is your company? Because there's a lot of this virtual office and registration where they can't even find the agent, let alone the person. And then how you need to have a kitas that is in compliance with your address, because they want to have control. They want to know, any country wants to know where foreigners are and what they're doing. So that's sort of important aspect. And I think the last one that added on to that, LKPM then have had heat in the sense that a lot of social media has spoken about expat having businesses they shouldn't have. Some of those are rightful, some of them are not, and we can discuss that because that depends on your KBLI or the business stream that you're doing. But basically things like, there is expat doing motorbike rentals, spas, some famous varungs and so on. And they claim that they're then in compliance from a LKPM side. So LKPM then looked at their books, and that kind of leads to LKPM. I guess LKPM is the Ministry of Investment, where they looked at in particular LKPM report, so the quarterly investment report, who has not done that and who have we sent warning letters to, and who do we know for sure is a visa company in the sense it's only for visa. So they put together a list of, I think, totally about 500 people. I'm not sure on how many companies, but maybe 100 companies, something like that, that went across to immigration. And what they did was they pulled the NIB, the identity of your company, your registration number, and said, this is void, these businesses no longer exist, please deport the expats on the list. And some of them had already left, but that's when immigration knocked on doors companies and said, you're void, you have to leave. And that's where the sort of social media frenzy and panic happened. And I think what a lot of agency then discovered was that compliance is happening. And two, you no longer deal only with immigration or LKPM in the province. It's all happening from central government in Jakarta. So very few agencies have a reach to actually go and talk to them and don't even know where to start with that. So that, I think, is the major changes and aspects that I've seen happening recently.
All right, just a quick recap. Well, not recap, actually. We're going to go back because there are people here that I know, some of which have been here for a long time, and they understood every single word that you said. When you said KBLI, they said, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And there are some who are saying, KBL what? I have no idea what you're talking about. So maybe just if we just take a minute or two, maybe just to kind of go through how the process of setting up a company, not down to the minutia of it goes to this department, that department, but the general things of kind of coming here, choose what you want to do, then what the KBLIs are and so on. So people here can understand, which maybe have no idea but are looking to set up a company here.
Yeah, I think to begin with that, there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding on who does what in this too. And I think one of the aspects is when you set up a PMA by law in Indonesia, that needs to be what they call a large entity with a minimum paid-up capital of 10 billion.
So PMA is foreign-owned company?
Correct. Foreign-owned entity, so like an LTD, something like that. So that's one. Two, then you need to define obviously what business stream, and that's what we call KBLI, business stream. And there is about, 1,500 of them, so it's quite complex. And some of those are 100% open to foreigners, some are not open at all, very few actually, and some of them have a need for local partner.
So KBLIs could be something like from business consulting,
to
real estate,
hospitality.
Whatever.
But what people also don't realize is that every KBLI, unless the first two digits of that KBLI is the same as others you have. So for instance, like I was talking about someone earlier about 68200, that's real estate brokerage. 68111 is buying, letting real estate. That qualifies as 10 billion paid up capital. But if you have 6-8, a couple of those, and then a couple of 7-2 consultancy and something else, each of those triggers 10 billion paid up capital. So then I've seen companies with like 20 of them, and then they said, they're not activated. I said, what does that mean? It all goes into the legal department's structure, which then uploads to OSS. So it's all visible. And on those KBLIs, there is then 4 different grades, I guess, of risk management. So low risk, the government says you can just go to work. Medium, you need to have some additional permits, and then you have medium, high, and high. It gets more complicated. So for instance, spa business is today a high risk and quite complicated to pull down permit. And that's before we get into what we may talk about later, PBG, SLF, all of this also relates to the zoning of where you do your business. So if you're running a commercial business, you need to be in a commercial area or a tourism area, or at least a mixed zone. Can you do that in a yellow zone that everyone invests in and is supposedly for, residentials or farming land? That adds on further to the confusion and where all these misunderstandings go on. There is a clear path in this from the Indonesian government. I guess the biggest challenge is that they're very siloed in how they work, so they're not into that perfect habit of communicating. But we see that now with what we just said, that immigration, LKPM, and soon tax office will integrate into one system and communicate on compliance. Got it.
All right. So we've got a few steps there, and just to keep everybody on the same page. So KBLIs, it's a paid up capital. This word has been used a lot. Maybe not everyone here understands what paid up capital means. So can you get into that?
Paid up capital means paid up capital, so that's capital that you paid up. There is the confusion between what you can do and not do in terms of what we call a statement letter, so a notarial statement letter saying that the shareholders kind of have that capital in between them somewhere, and then we'll go from there. That's kind of been okay, and LKPM seem to be okay with that in the sense that if you do your LKPM report, you get it responded to in as approved. Before, it used to be 2.5 billion paid up capital and 10 billion in commitment. And you can still have that approach to SpeakuP non-formally, in the way that I said, that you do report and they respond approved, then the chances they'll continue with that. But you can actually have a communication with SpeakuP where you say, okay, we're going to put in 2.5 billion and we're going to buy some land, whatever it is, and then we're going to go from there. And you submit a kind of a long-term plan on that. They revert then with an approval to that, and your LKPM report gets measured up against that. Okay. But strictly, yeah, paid up capital is paid up capital. But yeah, that is also where you kind of get into what's immigration's job, what's SpeakuP's job, and what's the tax office job. Like, for instance, we've seen one or two cases where tax office has said, oh, you've only contributed with 4 billion, you haven't contributed with 6. That means you're lending that capital from the shareholders, and we want to charge an interest on the rate that you need to pay to yourself for lending that capital to the company. That's not correct, and I think you can argue with the tax office. They should just look at the actual situation of what you should be taxed on, whether that is revenue or dividend and so on. But yeah.
Cool. So we've got about 8 minutes. After, we're going to have questions. So maybe now might be the time to, if you have a few questions in your mind, to formulate what those questions may be, keeping in mind that, it's okay to mention your name, your company if you want, but then please go straight to the question, okay? So we've spoken about immigration, LKPM now. The tax is next, but just this report. Maybe go into that LK, just so people know what that part is.
Yeah,
LKPM.
So when you have an active and running business and company, and actually from when you set up, you're supposed to do monthly tax reports, but also a quarterly, what we call LKPM. So it's an investment report that goes to the investment ministry, and that's important now. We hear rumors that the one due now in April, if you don't do that, they'll send you one warning letter, and if you don't respond to that warning letter, they pull the NIB that we talked about, the permit. So there will probably be a few more companies that will hit that list, that then will find its way to immigration, and they'll look for those companies to take action. Okay. And I think if I just add on to that there's an awful lot of companies that has no interest of compliance, and like I said, they are only here for the visa purpose, and I think those should be dealt with. But there's also people who, and I say this a lot, that ignorance of law is not an argument in any country, and not here either. But sometimes companies get caught up in that. Maybe the agent forgot, or they didn't understand fully what they were doing, or the communication, like when you set up a company, you have an OSS access and you don't have access to that. Your agent had it and disappeared somewhere. There is a chance that then these cases can be argued, and we can save the company, and therefore also save the immigration status. Yeah.
And quickly, just last one recap. OSS, please just let everyone know what OSS is.
So OSS is an online single submission. It's a system where everything exists. So all the other systems, tax system, legal department system, exist below that. So OSS pulls data from these systems, your permits, even PBG, SLF, that we'll talk about a little bit later, is uploaded to that. So your whole company's life and history appears on that system. And it's important to have that in compliance. Like now we see people who set up as a director, but they don't have a personal tax ID. They can't do the tax report for the director, and therefore they can't do the tax report for the company, and it gets red flagged. They can't do any changes to the company, and so on and so on. Okay, so taxes. Now, by the way, in case of you watching at home, today we're talking about compliance in Indonesia, episode 467, SpeakuP Monday, brought to you by Seven Stones Indonesia, and we're having a conversation with Terje H Nilsen, who is a founder and director of Seven Stones Indonesia. So taxes now, we've got taxes, and then we've got this the PBS and SLF, get my words right, and then we're going to go to your questions. All right, so taxes. Yeah, so briefly on taxes, I don't think there has been any sort of substantial changes. There was the sort of VAT debate from 11 to 12%, and some businesses, in particular luxury goods, cars, properties, and so on, now have a 12% VAT compliance. But my joke about VAT in Bali, it's kind of like talking about COVID. It's a virus. It's something that nobody wants to talk about. But they're coming with a new tax system called the core tax system. And this is maybe a bit more driven towards their own population, in the sense that an Indonesian's KTP, or identity number now, is same as your tax number. So everyone is suddenly in the tax system. It also has the opportunity to, without a lengthy procedure, look at your accounts to compare with your tax report. So a lot of people now need to be in compliance. They may have had reported some and maybe not on some other aspects. And that also obviously impacts us, that the tax office now, if they suspect us of any misconduct or reports, they can actually verify that as before they asked us for copies of the account, now they can go directly to the banks and get that access. And I think the government now is very focused on increasing their tax base. Again, more driven towards 280 million Indonesians and companies all over. But it hits us as well. So tax compliance forward is extremely important.
So now the final part for this session, and then we're going to go to your questions, is about property, which I think, just a quick raise of hands, who here either owns a property or would like to, just raise your hand. Yeah, so it's about half. Okay, great, thank you. So, let's go into that, PBS and SLF. And by the way, let's do this in the best process. If you're developing or if you're building your villa, let's integrate that into the process that you should be doing.
Yes, I think Indonesia studied systems abroad on how this should be done properly, and implemented eventually in 2021 their own system. So it switched away from what was called an IMB, or a build permit, to now a PBG and an SLF. So PBG is kind of where you go to the council, you say, I have this piece of land, I want to do this, can I or can I not? And then there's a long list of like 7 or 8 different aspects that you need to comply with. So like architectural drawings, does it have the Balinese ornament designs and exterior look, certified construction or building, and then MAP, and if you do drill tests and so on, all of that needs to be in compliance. It gets uploaded, and you may be called in to do some meetings with the Public Build Ministry, who issues these permits. And at some stage it goes through and it gets into a process where you get a bill, you pay the taxes, you get your PBG, and then you start building. And when that building is at 80% of completion or 100% completed, you request an SLF, which is an activation code. So that will be an SLF for a resort, a hotel, a house, a villa, whatever it is. And they will then verify whether you have built in compliance or not, and then issue the SLF. A PBG is for almost ever. SLF is renewed every 5 years. And this is where the complexity and risk management that people need to watch out for. What went wrong in this, to me, in Bali, and I will ask, who has an already approved SLF or even PBG today? I think very, very few. But there was a regulation saying that any project that was started before that law came in place, that you could then just do an SLF. So they come and check the building, says, okay, off you go. Anything after that must go through PBG and SLF. And to build without a PBG is a criminal offense. Police can knock on the door. If you have accidents, if you have, God forbid, someone, break a leg and an arm, the liability is immense. The penalty they can fine you goes from 10 to 30% of the cost of the construction, plus or jail time. So to me, I don't understand it. On your project too, if you don't have a PBG, you can't get an insurance. Who the fuck builds without an insurance, and who buys a property that cannot show they have these papers in place? I don't get it. What we then see on this is that the different zoning. We have like pink zone, tourism zone, mixed zone, commercial zone, yellow zone, residential, and then what someone called green zone, and then green belts, 2 different things. And kind of many agents say, oh, you can do whatever you want in all of these zones. It's not correct. For instance, in a yellow zone, which is residential, we now have clients who have started building millions of dollars worth of property on an HDB title. They cannot get their permit. Not possible. And then you get into the aspect of where is it all? I'll lease the land and I get the freehold owner to apply for the PBG and SLF. One, the owner may be nervous about that because he will get questions from tax office on where he got the money from. He'll then show, oh, I have this bully or expat that leases the land. But to me, then we get into this question of, isn't that a circumvention of the law? If they deny you a PBG permit on an HDB title, why would they grant you on a rental? And this is where nobody can really answer what's going to happen. But to me, the risk management of that, maybe you get an SLF in some shape or form, and I think most don't have it yet. It's only valid for 5 years. And if a further stricter enforcement comes, and you can see the movement now towards compliance in terms of renting out villas, these new associations will started, and they're starting to look at it, in particular from the big resort. This is, oh, the tourists, they're coming, but they're not staying in the hotels. Where are they? Oh, they're in all these illegal villas. So that to me is a high risk where you bought into a project that 5 years from now may not have a permit. And if you don't have an SLF, you cannot get an operational permit. You cannot get an operational permit for your business. You cannot get an operational permit for your spa or whatever it is that you're trying to do on that piece of land. So then people say, oh, it's so complicated, it's so difficult. Go back to your own home country and try there, and you'll see it's exactly the same. It's difficult, it's complicated, and you need to be in compliance. So also in Bali.
All right. So look, questions in about a minute. Now, just to recap on something. So, Canggu. Love those bikes, or even the exhaust. It's like this. So, if you're here in Bali, get help. It's kind of that simple. Get help, right? Because there's so much going on in all these different areas, and you know, you may try your very best and still miss, right? And you're trying your best, and that can have consequences. So again, what I say to friends and people that we advise and so on is, you know, I'm not your guy, okay? But I can tell you who to go to, and I can show you who to go to and why, right? So this is one thing which maybe will be one of the key things or key takeaways that everyone here who's watching or here in person can take away, is do your best to do the right thing. Right? That's number one. Number two, obviously, you know, Terje sitting here, he's here for a reason too, right? They've been here for 30 years. He's immensely qualified, up to date with the regulations and what's going on now. And he knows this because we had this conversation. We work with different companies. Each one of them, I feel, has something that they do really, really well. So I think everyone does tax, consulting, but there are some companies that do that property really well. There are some companies who do, boom, tax really well. There are some companies who do, boom, immigration really well. There are some companies who do criminal law really, really well. So when it comes to Seven Stones, I mean, I think tonight you get the sense of what they do really well is more than one thing, right? So I would highly recommend that if you're in a situation either entering into or you kind of find yourself in the middle of SHIT right now, then you reach out to Terje, Seven Stones Indonesia. We can connect you as well. So please do your best to do your best, right? We're foreigners here. My wife is Indonesian. His wife is Indonesian as well. Well, ex-wife now. I think it's probably Indonesian now anyway. We're still guests, right? So we do the best we can with what we can to make the right moves. So now time for questions. So remember,
maybe I can add on a little bit to that. So sort of what we talked about, the overall compliance to me is the thing that we really understand, because you can do something on a legal side of a company that impacts your taxes or the other way around. And a black letter lawyer or tax consultant won't always see this. As an example, there was a client of ours that came and spoke and asked us about advice, and he said, "Oh, I own all this land, but my tax consultant says that doesn't qualify." So I said, "Do you have the 68111 KBLI business stream in your company?" I said, "Well, then it does qualify, because there's nothing else that you do. You actually invest only in land and property." But the tax consultant then had an issue with increasing the paid-up capital, because she feared that there was going to be a tax audit, and then they'll say, "Oh, you got to pay some interest on your own loan to your company." But when I looked at that company, he had 20 KBLIs. And I said, "You should actually have 160 billion in paid-up capital. What is your worry about now increasing it formally in the deed of establishment to 13 or whatever it is that we discussed, owning properties in Rotterdam, Lombok, and other places, and get rid of all these business streams right away before someone actually starts looking at it?"
Thank you very much indeed. Brother Guzman, so the third mic. By the way, Instagram Live is working, Guzman? It's good? Great. So we have over here Toby with a question. Yep. Okay, so remember, name, company is fine, and please go straight to your question, because then we can fit more questions in and give more value. Just give us a second, it'll mic it up. Yeah, Guz? Yeah.
All right, that's better. Toby Naji, Bali Property Financed. Now, I just want to ask a question about property. In particular, you referenced the Balinese style roofs, right? Now, there's lots of properties here that have flat roofs, and the trend here is Mediterranean style. How do you circumvent that? I mean, how do you get approvals for that?
I think that it's questionable that permit is genuine, first of all. There are two aspects to this. One is the footprint, and in the footprint, particularly for Badung, they are working on a system where, let's say you're allowed to have 60% footprint, and if you reach 70 or 75, they have a clear penalty on that. So they'll increase your land and build tax, yearly taxes. On the design, what happens a lot is that you do the PBG, those are there, but what you have built, they're not there. But they're picky on this. So you have to have some kind of that ornament on the top of your building, and some store remove them or whatever. They'll talk about penalties and say, "Oh, we'll fine you." Sometimes official, sometimes not. But the chances is when they come back 5 years later and want to do the SLF again, there's a cost to that too. I've yet to see buildings being torn down. I've seen a few that has been asked to cut on the height of the building because they've gone beyond the 15 meters, and they've been asked to adjust their roof design to comply with what we're talking about, the Balinese design. There's another aspect of that coming too, where architects now, and we talked about the permit that they need to be able to do the PBG, but there's a second permit that comes that relates to educating them on understanding every province. So if you want to be an architect in Bali, you need to have a license for Bali. And if you then later consult or build a project that doesn't comply, your license is in jeopardy. So that's going to get tighter and tighter as well.
Wow.
Thank you. So just behind you, Tobe. Thank you. Yeah, Jono. And then we've got my brother in the corner. Another brother. All brothers.
All brothers. Two quick questions. The first one, there was a lot of acronyms used. I was one of them KBM, some sort of monthly audit or something you were mentioning? I was making notes, but I didn't catch that one.
Yep. So LKPM, I guess. There's two. BKPM, that's the Ministry of Investment.
Okay.
And then there's LKPM, which is a report to that particular ministry that you do quarterly.
Okay. And then my second question is, so I'm in the process right now. I'm kind of working with two individuals that have been here for 10 years, and I did kind of regulatory and consulting compliance in Canada for real estate. So I'm very much into wanting to be on side and do things the correct way. I'm finding definitely some resistance to some of the individuals that have been here for a longer duration of time by virtue of the fact that, oh, that doesn't really matter. We can pay the visa agency. And of course, what I'm hearing tonight is that's not the case. What I want to understand is, if a new PMA was to be formed tomorrow that wanted to get into real estate development and there were 3 shareholders, would each of those shareholders need to deposit the equivalent of, I think it's about 615,000 US, 10 billion rupiah, into an Indonesian bank account? Or could one provide like a letter of credit from an accredited financial institution in America stating that these funds are here? The first project that we're doing is going to be 12 billion rupiah with 18 billion owing. So I guess 2-part question. One, is it 10 billion per shareholder? And does that money need to be deposited into an Indonesian bank in correlation with the development at the time of PMA formation?
So I guess depending on the status that those shareholders want to, in terms of investor kitas, if they want an investor kitas, yes, each of them has to have 10 billion on paper. But I don't see the reason why all of them really need to stay here. They can have then different kitas. So as a director, you can have a working kitas. If you own, let's say, 1/3 of those shares and you have 3.3 billion, then you don't have the investor kitas, but you can call about working kitas. But the PMA in itself need 10 billion paid up capital that should be deposited, but we don't see any signals yet from LKPM that they want to enforce that, and they debate whether themselves if they actually have the regulations to do that. So you would do a statement letter saying that we have that and we'll start investing. As a minimum, you should have, I think, 2.5 billion, and the rest can then be on its way as you invest and build your business. And again, as long as you are diligent with the investment report, the LKPM report, and that comes back as approved, you're all right.
Great question, Jono. And by the way, what Jono was just saying is that if you have a question, so what we try to do is to keep everybody together, but it's not always possible, right? So if there was a term that you didn't understand, don't feel, like too embarrassed to ask, because you think everyone here knows, because everyone doesn't know. They pretend to know, but they don't. So if your question is very quick, and it's a quick point of clarity on something you didn't understand, it is totally okay to raise your hand and ask, because there's someone else who probably is in the same situation as you are. Over to you. Yeah, brother.
Yeah, Kevin here. One quick question first is, you were saying that about each KBLI needs to be a 10 billion paid up capital per KBLI as well, or is it depending on which KBLI that's
Yeah, so each KBLI, if they're in a different business stream, then they trigger 10 billion in paid up capital. But many times you'll find, like real estate, there is 5 or 6 different that all start with the first digit of 68. If you have 5 of those, then it's only 10. So if they're related with the first 2 digits. So you can find that sometimes in F&B and some consultancy business. So it really depends on each. But if they are different in nature of business, then each of them trigger 10 billion paid up capital, yes.
Okay. And my other quick question is regarding the working kitas. If you're just a startup, you start in your company. If you have if you are 2 inside of the company, wanted to have 2 director working kitas, you have also to have 20 employees inside of the company at first, or you can just start with yourself inside of the company? With
a director's position. So this regulation of 1-to-10 ratio comes and goes a bit. It's a manpower regulation. And sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. It keeps being debated. But it's, as a startup and as a director, whether that is the director of operational or director of marketing, you'll probably get away with maybe having 1 or 2 to qualify those kitases.
Thank you very much. Yeah, David. So just quickly, so there's 2 things that come up for those people which are looking to set up a company. Now, remember, I am not a visa agent, right? So this is unqualified. He can qualify it. So just remember, that you have this negative list as well. Right, so maybe I'll ask you, Terje, to talk about the negative list, and then after that, if you can quickly clarify, so those people who are looking to buy land or looking to set up a property, why the zoning is really important before you buy. Right, over to you.
The first question was on
the negative list.
Negative list. So the Indonesia had what they call the negative investment list in 2018, 19, 20. They did a few changes to what they now refer to as the positive investment list. And I think there's about 240 different business streams. Majority of them are 100% open to foreigners, so you don't need a local partner. You're more than welcome to have, of course, and that's encouraged. But then you have very few that are fully protected, and you cannot have a PMA at all because they deal with national security or something like that. And then you have, I think, about 89 who is reserved for UMKM or SMEs. But there are options for a PMA to cooperate with a local company. So they'll have, say that you need, for instance, in all of you are probably developers, or some of you, and you cannot be 100% foreign owned as a developer. You need a local partner for at least 1/3 of your shares, and you need to have a track record as a developer, as a foreign entity or person to do that. And then you get into the permit aspect of that too. So just to confuse you further, we can,
And then before you go to the property and the zoning, before you buy, one quick thing. So for example, now you can update me on this one, but it's this critical. So setting up a cafe, I think the negative list when we set one up was 51% needs to be owned by an Indonesian, my wife, and 49% can be owned by me. Right? So 51, 49. Yet with restaurants, I think at that time it could be 100% foreign owned. So cafe, restaurant, what's the difference? You figure it out, right?
Yeah, I think the other aspect of that is that I see an awful lot of people who has bought a piece of land or leased a piece of land, and they come to us and kind of says, figure it out. And that's where the complexity starts on what you can actually do on that in a formal, straightforward way or not. So what I tend to say is to people that if you want to do business in Indonesia, think about what it is that you want to do, set up your company, and then based on that you develop a business plan, and then you go and look for the land. Whether you are then going to do a restaurant or a coffee shop or villas or a hotel or whatever it is, you know that already limits the zoning that you're looking at. So to me, it sort of goes beyond that. And I actually was just discussing before too that I get confused when I see how people can throw 2, 3, 4, 500,000, sometimes millions of dollars into an investment without going through those steps prior to it. And a psychologist explained it to me that people are so intrinsically motivated to have part of the Bali lifestyle that they just shut down for common sense and regulations, and they go and do whatever they're told to do, and then have issues later on.
So now, just before we go to David's question, it was about the importance of, because again, I think this FOMO, right, fear of missing out, seems to be so strong, right? Whereas, you know, I've got to get my land. Everyone is developing. I've got to get my villa. I've got to da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I see some land here for sale and it's a bargain price, right? I want to get that land, and I'm going to, because I've got to seal the deal now, I've got to give them the deposit, give them the money right now, right? I want it, you know, and I'll work out the zoning later. No, over to you.
Yeah, I think unfortunately a lot of people take advantage of that, and sometimes, in all fairness, they really don't know what they're doing. And we discussed a little bit before here on the compliance of actually being a real estate agent or agency. Hopefully, and I think they will be. They're enforced into the future. But yeah, the zoning and all of the aspects that we talked about and what you can do on the land is tremendously important.
Yeah, and there have been some who, you know, oh, my agent or my da-da-da said we can work out the zoning, right?
No, I think the aspect of that, like prior to COVID, I think 70-80% was actually HDB or change a freehold title into a commercial title into a PMA. Today it's probably 80% lease, and something went horribly wrong in that process. Because I say this, and it'll scare you further, and you'll all come and talk to me, and that's the purpose, right? But I argue that hak sewa, the lease that we see, to me is not a very good structure and not very legal. it's not meant to be 30 plus 20 years of lease, whatever it says. There are registered leases that a HGB or HDB title, that we call it, on top of freehold, where you get a secure title stamped into the freehold certificate. That creates security for you. But with that comes compliance, because BPN will ask, oh, what's the zoning? What are you going to do? Villas, hotels, whatever. You need to be in compliance. They'll ask for it. They'll ask for a quitas if you have a PMA. If not, you cannot get it. Lease as a private person, don't do it. People say, oh, it's okay, just hire an agent to rent out the villa and pay some taxes, 20%. Not good. If you ever have, one is immigration, they find out you're already in breach of immigration regulations, and hopefully there are some options that evolve from that. But Indonesia has what they call second home option. Why would they have that if they allow all this madness to happen? And then you get into having a dispute at some stage. Let's say you have an issue with the landlord, you have an issue with the access road or whatever it is, and you're going to go to the court and say, I'm John Doe out of, UK. I leased this land as a private person. I'm running a business on it. When I leased it, it was priced at 5 billion. I only reported 2.5 to the tax office. The rest we kind of figured out with some other deals. But I'm really upset with Bagong because he makes an issue on the access road. You can't. And the other thing of this underreporting on a lease, why do you do that as a buyer? Let's say you were selling a piece of land to me and it's 5 billion or a property. You underreport that to 2.5. He's happy because he reduces his taxes to half. But me then, I cannot write this off. It's a lease, right? So you can write that off in your books every year to reduce your actual taxes. So it's absolute stupidity. If you sell a lease that you legally own through a PMA, what are your taxes? VAT, 10% final income. So you don't count the profit of that further into your company. But again, you get hit with 11% profit of all the other aspects of your business, renting out whatever it is. 10% dividend if you have a tax residence in Indonesia, 15% if you're abroad. Not a very healthy structure. So anyone saying 43% ROI, 28% ROI, tell them to show you the figures.
Really important. Now, there was one thing before I go to that question, but it's gone. I was so engrossed in the answer. What was it now? Tax, accounting, land. It will come back. So, Davide, you just joined us. So the question is, for questions, is your name, your company is fine, but then go straight to the question. Yeah, over to you.
I was here. I was just behind the whole trees.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Terje, for your expertise. Open to everybody here. I'm just confused. This applies to Bali only or to all the Indonesian islands?
All of Indonesia, same regulation.
Okay, good. What about digital nomads? Is there anything that has changed? I have a company, somewhere else, and there are lots of digital nomads in Bali.
Yeah, I think Indonesia won forward. I think that the complexity of setting up a PMA, the requirement for capital, I think forward will actually be reduced because Indonesia is figuring out that they compete against Vietnam, they compete against Thailand, they compete against a lot of countries. And if you look at I think real estate transactions in Bali last year was estimated in the villa for 1.8 billion times 10 years is an awful lot of money that they don't really want to disturb. And there's also other aspects, international treaties and agreements that Indonesia signs left, right, center. But to that aspect of, what was the question again? Sorry, I will carry it away. Digital nomads, yeah. So digital nomads, they wanted to, again, compete also against Thailand, other Portugal, and so on. So they issued a visa that says, yeah, you can sit here on a digital nomad and do work abroad. So you're consulting against some company in the US or Europe somewhere. And that, for now, is actually fine. But this is what we then ask immigration. We said, what about tax compliance? Because if you stay in Indonesia by law, it says 193 days, you're here, you're by law a tax residence. In the past, the tax officers then said that, oh, you need a quitas and a tax ID before you can be in tax compliance, so we don't really want to talk about it. But now with the new core tax system, that's going to come. So they will see that you come and go, and once you hit that 183 days, there will probably be an effort to figure out where you are and to get you into tax compliance, or at least make you aware that that applies.
Okay, I'd like to know your opinion about the future of Bali, considering this tightening. I know it's difficult to predict the future, but what do you think is the main driver? Of course, we want to bring justice to any system. Is the main driver creating an island where we don't just grow buildings everywhere? Is it to maintain nature? Is it so that we have more taxis to have better streets? There are 12 accidents on the road every day in Bali. 2 people die every day on motorbike accidents. How do you see the future with more income, let's say, from this tightening?
Okay. So just before you answer that, can I just pass the microphone forward to Mark? Thank you. All right, Terry, over to you. Thank you, David.
I think there's many aspects to that in terms of compliance. I think a few things. One, that the government want to identify taxes, which today is as a missing link, and even tax offices. Number of tourism grows, but income doesn't necessarily, tax income doesn't necessarily grow in the same way. I think that the government and everyone agrees that the development has gone out of hand and out of control and not being enforced, and there's many reasons for that. And a slowdown, I don't think, will reduce the appetite for Bali. I actually think the opposite, that with clarity, more people will come. They will seek developers and developments that has a clear structure, complies with taxes, has their permits, and buy into that, or make sure that their own business and company is in compliance. So I don't think that it'll have a negative impact. There's a lot of noise right now that in some ways I think impact that, both on tourism and investors, but I think that'll pass and it'll be fine.
Now, just for Mark answer or clarify something, I think just quickly. So, Jono, right? Just reminded me of something earlier on that people may not realize. So, I'm from the UK, but lived a long time in Australia. Australia is always about own your own home. Right? So you own the land is what you're paying for. That's where the money is. And the structure, well, that's less money because you're looking for that capital appreciation over time. Now, when you come to somewhere like Indonesia, where you have leasehold and freehold, maybe when it comes to certain types based upon the length, then the capital appreciation isn't necessarily there. And that creates confusion for people about how the market works. So if you could clarify leasehold, freehold, and then what the model is.
Yeah, I think one aspect to pick up on what the gentleman was asking too, I think there is a political aspect to this too, in the sense that we've had a year of election and now we have a year of confusion, meaning that there is still an ongoing tug of war, I guess, between central and provinces, in particular with Bali, who still is dominated by one political party, not in line with central. So I think central is trying to take a much stronger control to push it in compliance. Where Bali then is heading, I think, into compliance. There has been words of and dialogue saying, oh, it's going to be a new Hong Kong and Singapore. That doesn't necessarily mean high-rise buildings, but that quality of infrastructure, that quality of lifestyle. There are talks now about a tax haven, so like family offices can probably in the near future set up in the special economic zone in Serangan and pay no taxes on having the capital in, and then it remains to be seen how that impacts and if they then invest into the industry.
Leasehold, freehold.
Yeah, so leasehold is by default the depreciating assets. You cannot treat that in your books in any other shape or form. When an agent say that, oh, you're going to get some capital gain, what they mean is that lease will go up in value. So if you sit on the lease for 5 years, maybe the increase in prices means that you can sell that with a profit. But a lease by default is a decreasing, bookkeeping an asset that you need to depreciate, and that's actually good for you in the sense that you can reduce your costs when you do your tax report. Freehold is like actually only available for Indonesians, so you have to be an Indonesian citizen. But when we look at an HDB title or a commercial title that a PMA can get, to me that is equal to that in the sense that you have an HDB title and you've been owning the property for 10 years, it doesn't depreciate. It's an asset also in the books. Let's say you sell that on to an individual Indonesian, he or she can then convert it back to a freehold. So it's an absolute ownership. In general, on the market, I think this too, and I sometimes talk to our clients and they sort of, I got $300,000, $500,000, I can get a 3-bedroom lease villa in Uluwatu or in Canggu on a 30 years lease, and I'm going to have XYZ ROI. And I sometimes can't help it saying, well, what if you buy a villa then in Flores on freehold? Bigger land, bigger villa, maybe not the greatest ROI, but a good capital gain. So I think it's pros and cons to both sides, but I don't think Bali is going anywhere in terms of popularity and continued increase in value and good business deals.
And what's the biggest mistake? And then Mark, over to you, because again, we hear this a lot, right? With this building that's been happening here in Bali, and apart from one person over here, I'm talking to, apart from one person, I think people have got this perception in their head that, hey, I've got X amount of years, which, I'll just roll it over after that and I'll get 60 years. Not necessarily realizing the complexity of rolling that over, and it's not a given, right? So if you could quickly go through that and maybe how people can how they can insure themselves.
Yeah, I think that a lot of lease structures are structured with a typical 30 plus 20 years, something like that. You pay for the first 30 years, and then it says that you have a first right of refusal or, something like that to extend, and everyone says, oh, don't worry, that's going to be okay. But if the landowner after 30 years says, no, I don't want to extend, you have no chance to enforce that. The only way that you can actually enforce that, and we entertained ourselves through the years with court cases on nominee structures and also these lease structures to see where the actual legal system stands. So if that is worded as a payment term, you can still determine at that stage what the land value is. That works. So let's say you've extended the 20 years with a 10 million, 100 million, whatever it is deposit, and you're going to work out with a mechanism of the price of gold or 3 different appraisals at that stage, then you can enforce it. So it's very important to make sure, and this is back to the legal complexity around the lease, that you really think through what it is that you're actually buying into, and that the master lease, because very often these are subleases and sometimes third and fourth hand subleases, that you get access to that master lease to clearly define what it says and what you can do and not.
Thank you. Brother Mark.
Yeah.
1 second, mate. I'm going to mic you up.
You'll have to pay for breakfast next time we meet.
I'm on.
Breakfast is on Mark, everybody. We're all going to go to breakfast. Thank you very much indeed.
You're all welcome to come.
Round of applause for the breakfast, please. Round of applause. You see we're awake. All right. Tomorrow, 6 o'clock, we're going.
I can say that joke first.
Yeah, please.
Rob introduced me to Mark. None of them remember their wallet. So who paid for breakfast? Me.
You did.
I didn't mind.
You did. I got you though. Everybody else, you're welcome as well.
I still can't find my wallet. I don't know. That was 2 years ago.
I just want to touch on you both sort of skirted around the subject a little bit, not to avoid anything, but more specifically, there is talks of squads or teams that go out from the government or from some kind of department that are now heading to really teach the Airbnb without a license type people a lesson. They've had guests kicked out of their property. And then they've been summoned to actually come in and speak to these squads, etc. Are you finding that this is... What do you know about that?
I think there's a few aspects, and I think one of them is that, and I get these messages all day long where people say, oh, I've heard this, I've heard that, I've heard whatever. In particular, in terms of immigration, they're going to go door to door. It's all from central government. They're going to, deport all of us. That's not true. central government teams comes politely to an office that may have a PMA registered and said, here is a letter, please come to Jakarta and answer questions. And that happens based on what I said before, the lack of compliance to BKPM. So it's a list from BKPM. The immigration in Bali in itself obviously have the right to investigate, and now there's going to be a cooperation program with every village. So every village will have a person or part of their structure where they can report, because they don't. And this to me is very sensible in the sense that everything these days goes viral. People say, oh, there's so much violence, there's so much this and that. And I said, have you ever been to Sky Garden? Back in the old days, you know, it was a lot worse. And I don't think it's any particular worse or better these days, but everything goes viral. And it creates a narrative that is not good. And they say the way we'll deal with this is that, first instance, someone, if they have an issue, they can report to immigration or police if it's a crime. But they can also go to the village, and the village will take it in and then possibly talk to immigration, so it becomes much more sensible. What you're referring to in terms of the Airbnb and villas, there was an association set up that most probably will be tasked with that particular purpose, and I think it will consist of tax, possibly immigration, public build ministry to make sure that you are in a zone that you can actually do this as a minimum, to identify taxes and any possible breaches of stay permits and so on. But I don't think it'll be sort of massive they understand that this needs to be done step by step, and there needs to be information spread out, and there need to be some kind of sunset policy. But yes, I agree. I think it'll be stepped up a lot more in terms of compliance, that you can no longer just, go and build a, villa somewhere and put it on Airbnb and it'll be okay. Just before COVID, tax office actually did that with the 45,000 listings that they found on Airbnb. They sent all of them a letter, and then it faded away because of COVID. So for sure that will come back, yeah.
Just another one. There's now over 80,000 listings on Airbnb. What do you see for the future of this particular market?
I think...
So 80,000 listings on Airbnb for Bali. 80,000. So if you want to go to Airbnb business, think again. Just a little word of caution.
I think that probably means that there's a lot of double listings. So there will be agents who list the same property, which is confusing, and similar things to what we see in real estate. And I know Airbnb government, they're trying to figure out how to discipline that and reduce it down to, if you work with an agent, you work with an agent. You don't work with 8 different agents. Market, I think what we see today, they say, tourist arrivals, they're the same, at least foreigners, maybe dropped 1 or 2%, but they're not in hotels, they're staying in villas and so on. I think there's been an awful lot of investments into mini villas. I don't understand what that means, or townhouses in all kinds of strange areas with not real structure on how they're going to market and drive this, and they're all going to rent out for $300 a night. I don't think that'll happen. There will be a adjustment in the market, and you're better off developing a proper villa if you're into the villa, or go to some of your projects who is like a full-on resort and you buy a fraction, I guess, a unit into that.
Great, mate. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? We're getting yes right over there. And another insider. Just while we're doing that, so I was meeting with tourism. I won't tell you who it was, but they're pretty senior here. This I did not realize, right? So in general, if you stay, so this is you coming to Bali, 2 or 3 star hotel, that kind of level, the money stays in Bali. If you go 4 or 5 star hotel, a lot of that money goes outside of Bali. Just a quick fun fact there, maybe to let you know that 2 and 3 star hotels stays in Bali. The money stays in Bali. Christian, over to you. Almost over to you. Guz, we've got the mic over here. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for giving this chance. Well, I would like to ask about because we have so many construction right now, and due to the moratorium law, right, and moratorium, and then also the SLF and PBG stuff, many properties right now doesn't have the PBG. They do have an SLF, but they do have a PBG. They don't have PBG. And when is investor coming to us, they ask in a way do you have the PBG? For sure, some of the property what we had is actually the number is already in process to register. But some of them is actually not been out as well. So what is the best to answer the investors? We do have we have the SLF, but the number is but we're already like processing our PBG, but we don't have it. But we cannot like giving that, right?
I understand your what's your business? What is it that you're doing?
He's in real estate for a developer in Bali.
Okay.
I won't mention the name. He always looks me strangely.
So we have the same complexity like you. We market and sell properties, and I think to answer it easily, you either have a PBG or you don't. You either have an SLF or you don't. So this sort of, there is a barcode somewhere in the system, meaning you've entered some data, really means nothing. I would demand access to that property's application, and sometimes I do this directly with PU. I go and said, what is this? Where is it in the system? And then you find out that they haven't complied with our third letter to let us know more about their MEP or whatever it is. So I'd be very careful if you sell a property like that and we're in the same situation. I would look at who the developer is and whether they have a good track record, because the chances are that you may sell a property to someone who doesn't get a permit. And then as an agent, you're not yet liable, but morally, ethically, reputation, that's a dangerous game to play.
Okay, thank you. It's a very difficult situation for everyone actually, especially in the relation to developers, and because the process takes so long to get it done.
It does not. It does because there is a lot of confusion and misinformation about it. But if you are in compliance, and I've seen this, with what you're supposed to do from a exterior aspect, MEP and so on, it isn't too long. And compared to other countries, very acceptable. It just means you have to do a proper business planning. The SLF may take some time because you apply when you're almost completed and then you wait for 4 or 5 months before they actually show up. But you can plan that as well with PU, so you can communicate to them and say, I've estimated that I'm going to complete my villa in 5 months, and you fill in the application. So they actually show up around the completion and you can get into the next stage of operating the villa.
So what kind of time are we talking about? So SLF, you mentioned maybe 4 to 6. It's hard to say, but in general.
It's something like that. And it depends a little bit on regency. Like Tabanan, Gianyar may be quicker because they don't have the same load. But like for Badung, they have like now probably 500-600 applications every month. And that's another challenge, manpower, to deal with all of this.
500 or 600 applications a month.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question. Yeah, anybody here? All right, good. Yeah, one over here. So just wait for the microphone. Yeah. So we'll bring it back over here. Now we're pretty much kind of over time, but the beautiful thing about having your own show is that you're not worried about the time. But if you do want some food, Tropical Nomad, 8:20 sharp. It is done, right? So if you want, I'm not going to tell you what he's whispering to me, but it has something to do with beer. If you want something to eat or drink, the menu is fantastic. Please make sure you order it before 8:20, otherwise it's not going to happen. Mark, back to you.
I think just in closing, there was a discussion there that he sort of touched on about a moratorium. Now it came and it went. Give us some more context with this word, because it made us all crap ourselves for a little while there, and then all of a sudden it was lifted again.
Yeah, so there was rumors about a moratorium, and a coordinating minister, quite powerful in the Jokowi government, issued a letter requesting or encouraging a moratorium to the Balinese government. In legal terms, it should have been the other way around, because the province has the possibility to do that. But none of the candidates that was running for office had any interest of dealing with that, and there was a PJ governor who then got nervous. But the main aspect of that was that the ministry that issued that 3 days later no longer existed. It was a new government, and the whole ministry ceased to exist. So obviously there was a lot of legal confusion what happens now, and nobody picked that up. We spoke to LKPM, we spoke to provincial government, and everyone said, we don't want to touch that. So there is no moratorium, never was one.
Thank you. All right, so look, one question. All right, so microphone was here somewhere, there somewhere. All right, so last question or two, and then just before your question, I'll give you a bit of a rundown. So what we're going to do, remember earlier on, the ones who are here, we had this opportunity to discover what people do and why they're here. And I would really love you to, and I invite you to, have that conversation with the person or people that you saw earlier on. Tropical Nomad is open 24 hours a day. Once again, I'm not saying you stay here for 24 hours, but you can if you want to. It's up to you. But please take that time. The second thing is that directly after this, we're going to grab everybody up here for a photo. Right? Then after that photo, we're going to make sure that if you want to join, thank you very much indeed, the SpeakuP Monday group, it is a one-way, yes, thank you, my brother. It's a one-way bulletin which keeps you up to speed with what's coming next week and so on and so on. It's a one-way group, so there's no talking about, and there's no talking in that group, right? So your news feed is safe. Very important here in Bali. So you can join that group as well. Also next week, it's all about health. So Health Hub Bali, again, that's I think the 37th episode. So make sure if you're interested in health, you look into that one coming up. And what else? Obviously, we have Tropical Nomad, Guzmang and Hadis. Thank you very much indeed, my brothers and sisters. To all of you who have come tonight, again, really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your energy of being here. And remember, make sure you stay, because there's people here that you really should talk to. Don't let this time pass because you want to get home. Don't. You've already made the effort to be here. Make sure it's worth it. All right? So, last question from you. I'll have something and then we'll wrap up. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I have a strategical question, because the last 10 years I used to focus really on digital businesses, I think as everyone else. And now, after 10 years of agency business, digital business, honestly, I want to get back offline. I want to invest in experiences. And I love the trend of like co-living, for example. I see it here on Bali a lot, and I'm considering maybe to invest here or in Europe. But my question is to you is, what do you think of this whole co-living trend, especially on Bali? Because there are so many options. I just talked today to some agents, and I have the feeling that they have not enough experience, as you told me, and they just do it, what's sometimes good, but in this business a big risk. So what do you think about the co-living trend?
Oh, I think that's a trend that will continue. I think that if you offer a co-living or even a resort, I think you need to be clear on what that is. So you'll have a specific co-living for, I don't know, digital nomads, whatever that means, in specific business streams and so on. I think what you see within boutique resorts, that the market is also falling away from the big hotels that we see in Nusa Dua, and that this is a worldwide thing. People want a clear experience. They'll come for, like I thought Kuta was going to be messed up after COVID, but it's thriving, and it's full of Aussies who comes on F&B holiday. They bring their kids and their family, and they eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, everything out, and obviously loves Bali for other reasons as well. But I think with Bali now also having a drive to do what they call health tourism, I think you'll find a lot of health destinations. That doesn't mean that you're sick and you go to a hospital. It may be, what we call functional or holistic medicine, spas and so on, that will be combined then with eco-resort. Eco-resort, again, then is a co-living, sustainability. You have some chickens running around, vegetables. I'm like you. I want to be in that space. I'm tired of this. I just want to sit up in Tabanan in the mountains and look down on the haze, except for during Nyepi, and enjoy. I have clean water. I can drink water from my tap, and when I shower, you can see my hair, how beautiful it is because of that, right?
Flowing Viking locks.
I think it's back to what do you really want? And I think defining that, like you talk about branding, social media, identity, and then people will come to what it is that you're providing.
Beautiful question. Thank you. So we're going to begin to wrap up now. So two things I want to do, maybe three. I love threes, you know that. The last question for you to think about, consider, ponder on, and then make a point to answer in about 3 or 4 minutes will be, we've had this episode today, which has always been about compliance in Indonesia, covering, tax. We've covered, immigration. We've covered property and the various avenues that can kind of head down, right? We've spoken about 7 stones a little bit in the intro. So maybe just to sum up, and this will be the last question, 3 or 4 minutes to think about the answer, is there anything else that you'd like to impress upon people or leave people with? And please make sure that you leave people with a way of contacting your company as well. So please include that in your summing up. 2 things which I wanted just to add now. So just remember, so a question here early on, great question. So what we do, my wife and I, we have a great company, which is all about, consulting and helping, companies that either want to set up in Bali or Indonesia at large, or have set up and want to grow. So let me just be very specific. We don't do PMAs. We don't do what Terje does. And a few weeks ago, we had another great law firm on the show. We don't do that. But we take off where they leave off. So to multiple market sectors, thanks to SpeakuP Monday, 1,000 guests, 10 market sectors, 10,000 of wonderful audience members like you, connecting them all. We have an incredible network. So what we do is that we utilize that network to plug you into business, from feasibility, whether it's co-living spaces, do they work, is there a future, which particular area, where to go, who are the leaders, how do you connect with those leaders to make sure that the strategy that you have in your mind is going to be the right one for the market, not one that works in Germany or in the UK or in Thailand, but will work here in Bali. So these are the sorts of things that we do. We plug you into business to make sure that you have the cultural adjustments to what Bali is, as well as the commercial, right? So we go through that in multiple market sectors, and our work has been endorsed, again, by government sectors, as well as business, international and national. So yeah, I would strongly suggest, if you find yourself in that place, to give us a call, and let's see if we can work together on it. It's very important. Number 2, Terje here is kind of going to smile now, was kind of integral in me or us setting up the Tabanan community WhatsApp. So what it is, it's 300 plus now. It's a mixture of local government. It's a mixture of 4 or 5 different groups, charities, foundations, real estate, a general group where most people kind of orbit and orientate around. Now, this is based upon really how can we come together as, foreigners, expats like me, whether we're married to Indonesians or not. How can we come together with local domestic Indonesians to, number 1, to see each other? So we have a once a month meeting where we get to see each other, right? Which, number 2, we get to learn about each other. So each month we go to a different stakeholders' property. Maybe it's ecotourism one, like Johnny's place, right? Bali Eco Stays, that now is 100% generates its own electricity. It's off the grid, and it's a beautiful property in harmony with nature and in harmony with the local community, which they back and backs them. Our meeting Thursday just gone was at Sahaja Sawa, always in Tabanan, which is a phenomenal, Bernard and his wife Ariane, fantastic people. They've done more than I can even think about through their foundation, Sahaja Sawa Foundation. Their property was the first one we went to as a family, and we fell in love with Bali and Tabanan. And then working with Erwan, who's a king in Tabanan, a royal family of Purianya Krambatan. So we've done about 20 different events, including the former tourism minister, of which about 5,000 or 10,000 people turned up to. That was a bit of a surprise. And then, other meetings, as I mentioned, at stakeholders' properties. So it's how do we come together and create responsible outcomes. So if you're interested in Tabanan, either from an investment point of view or a point of view of you just like to know more about it, one of our clients is UNESCO World Heritage that just won Best Tourism Village in the world. That's Jatilui. The MOU that we have with them is for 3 things: to source smart farming solutions. Number 2 is to extend the tourism assets in the area of Jatilui. And then number 3 is to bring or attract businesses or real estate with heart. Tri Hita Karana, which I've been through before for all of you which don't know, real quick, is, it's a philosophy here in Bali. It's a principle which I love, which is number one, if you have a business initiative or project, how does that impact human to God? Culture, customs, traditions, religions. Number two, how does it impact human to the environment, right? Regenerative systems, policies, and practices. How does it do that? Number three, people to people prosperity. How does it create and generate prosperity and distribute that amongst the whole community? Right? These three things create a conscious business, a conscious individual known as the 3 roads to happiness or prosperity. So this is the sorts of things that we do, what we love to do. So if that sounds like you and you want to know more about the Tabanan community, get in touch. RIB and Associates or Robert Ian Bonnick. You can find me everywhere on all the different social media channels. Okay, that was long, 3 or 4 minutes, I know, mate, but I gave you plenty of time to think. Thank you, Terje. Again, we know each other pretty well now, and again, I think very highly of you as being one of these incredibly important points of clarity about regulations, about what's happening in multiple industries here in Bali and beyond. So thank you for coming. Again, thanks to everybody else for coming. I leave the stage with you, Terje, to see us out with what maybe you'd like to repeat or something you'd like to speak about that you haven't mentioned already or reiterate, and also how do people get in contact with you or get in contact with Seven Stones Indonesia?
Thank you. I really appreciate and have an awful lot of respect for what you do. And I always like to come to these sessions and talk because we know they hit a larger audience and a lot of people get educated on what we're trying to do. And it's all for the better for all of us in Bali. I think as a closing statement, according to the news, the world is in a mess and, strange things are happening. The alliances, Europe, US, they're cracking and there's all kinds of strange things going on. Indonesia positioned themselves perfectly in this game in the sense that since their independence until today, they say we're geopolitically neutral. We don't care whether you're Chinese, Russian, American, or European. You're welcome to come as long as you do this on our terms. It's the 4th most populated country. It's the highest population in terms of number of Muslims, but very moderate Muslims. It will eventually be the 4th largest economy, and it's really shaping itself up for that. It has an awful lot of challenges that all countries do, politically, complexities of different ethnical groups, religious groups, and so on. It's a rich country and it's stepping up. So to me, it's absolutely one of the best places, if not the best, that you can invest. And you already see these tendencies now that risk management of having production in China, let's go to Indonesia. China says, to prevent toll wars that comes and goes every day if you read the papers. Let's go to Indonesia and set up some factories and so on and so on and so on. So in that you have the Diamond Valley. And if you look at the Southeast Asian region, almost regardless of what business you're in, Indonesia already is or will be 50% of that market. So you see a lot of the family offices and companies in Hong Kong and Singapore, they say, why don't we base ourselves in Indonesia? Because that's where the main market is for that region. And they can travel into Malaysia, Thailand, and other parts of Indonesia from there. And that's where this motivation to set up a tax haven out in Pulau Serangan, most probably it'll be, comes from. In terms of regulation, people say, it's so difficult, it's so complicated. I say it's not. It's nothing better, nothing worse than what it is back home. You just didn't do your business there, or you forgot about it being here so many years. And they are really trying to make us all happy by constantly listening to us and taking it in. So taxes, zoning regulations, build permits, general permits for companies and so on. As long as we're in compliance, we'll be fine. It's a perfect place to invest, regardless of that being real estate or digital nomads or tech business or whatever it is. So I don't think we can be in a much better place in a country like this, and in particular at this time in Bali. For Seven Stones, I think Rob said it all. We've been here for a long time. I've been here for a long time. We have our finger on the pulse, if that makes sense. We listen a lot to what goes on in central government, and we pay a lot of attention to what is kind of coming in the legal system, so we can tell you. And we're not an agent or consultant who is going to kill your dreams. We just want you to understand. We want you to understand the regulation. We want you to understand the risk, so you can manage that risk from a investment perspective. And that, I think, is where we do really well and can help people to make sense out of where you are. And you can find me, Seven Stones, online. I'll give you a card if you want. I have an awful lot with me in my bag. And I'm happy to really talk to anyone, whether that is WhatsApp or we meet up for a coffee. I kind of say, people ask, what is it going to cost to have a consultation with you? And I said, a cup of coffee and a chocolate cake. If it's after 5, maybe a pint of beer. I'm not, and you can ask me as many times as you want, almost. I've had clients who's asked me hundreds of times of questions, and I say, I think we need to put a retainer to this, but I'm happy to answer. Sometimes quickly, sometimes it may take a day or two, but because with that, I think trust comes into the market. Whether you talk to us or not doesn't really matter, but you'll talk well about us to someone else and they'll go and come to us, and it just works for us too. So I think that was all I had to say. Thank you.
Round of applause, Terje H Nilsen.